Summer of 1944. The sun beat down on Camp Forest, Tennessee, thick with humidity. A German prisoner in a sweat-soaked uniform rounded first base, dirt flying as he slid into second. Around him, fellow POWs roared with laughter and cheers. Only months earlier, these same men had been fighting in North Africa, hunting Allied soldiers through desert sands. Now they were arguing balls and strikes with Americans leaning lazily against the backstop, too relaxed to even reach for their rifles. It seemed impossible. Enemies, Nazis no less, playing America's game in the heart of Tennessee. And yet this was no isolated moment. It was happening across the country, in hundreds of camps, with hundreds of thousands of German prisoners. What began as a strange new pastime would become something much bigger. Baseball wasn't just killing boredom. It was dismantling propaganda, breaking down ranks, and teaching democracy one pitch at a time. Because in America, even your enemy could step up to the plate. And that's where the story of German POWs, baseball, and the unbreakable spirit of the U.S. truly begins. The story truly begins not on the diamond, but on the battlefield. In May of 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. 250,000 battle-hardened Germans now in Allied hands. They boarded Liberty ships, not knowing their destination. Nazi propaganda had promised them starvation, chains, and torture at the hands of their American captors. Instead, they found themselves in cargo holds where sailors showed them something unthinkable: how to swing a bat. On deck, amid dents from torpedo strikes, American crewmen tossed baseballs, laughed, and ran in circles that made no sense to their prisoners. Why celebrate failure? In war, missing 7 times out of 10 meant death. In baseball, it meant you were a star hitter. For Germans raised on discipline and order, the game seemed absurd until it began to make sense. When the ships docked in Norfolk, Virginia, the illusions cracked wider. Longshoremen on lunch break tossed balls back and forth with captured soldiers. No hatred, no fear, just men sharing a game. As the trains carried them inland, past factories still humming at full speed, past schoolyards and cow pastures, one image kept repeating: baseball diamonds everywhere. Children waving at enemy soldiers through train windows, gloves on their hands, balls in the air. A nation at war still found time to play. By the summer of 1943, the first large groups arrived at Camp Forest. The commandant had a theory: keep the prisoners busy, and escape attempts would vanish. He requisitioned equipment, hundreds of baseballs, dozens of bats, leather gloves. They arrived in weeks, faster than German quartermasters could deliver bread to the front lines. At first, officers forbade participation, calling it collaboration. But boredom, Tennessee heat, and curiosity proved stronger than ideology. When a decorated tank commander finally picked up a bat and swung, the dam broke. Within weeks, daily games erupted across the camp, and something far larger had begun. By the fall of 1943, the chaos of pickup games had transformed into order. Prisoners began carving bats from pine boards and stitching gloves from scrap leather. Soon, 6 full teams emerged inside Camp Forest. They gave themselves names: Rhineland Raiders, Bavarian Bears, and scheduled 3 games a day. German precision met America's pastime. Former accountants became scorekeepers, wrestling with strange new statistics: ERA, RBI, OBP. The camp newspaper printed standings and game recaps in German. Guards took the role of umpires, learning to shout American phrases that echoed through the barbed wire. "You're out!" "Safe at second!" The discipline impressed outside observers. A Red Cross delegate noted, "The German teams display remarkable organization. They practice bunting for hours. Their double play timing rivals American clubs." What he didn't write was even more important. These men weren't just learning baseball. They were absorbing democracy. On the diamond, rank meant nothing. The rules were the rules, whether you were a sergeant or a private. The message spread like wildfire. By the spring of 1944, other camps, from Texas to Colorado, were fielding teams. And at Camp Hearn in Texas, baseball became legend. There, nearly 5,000 Afrika Korps veterans built a concrete stadium with dugouts, covered seating for 2,000 spectators, even an electric scoreboard. German craftsmen who had once fortified the Atlantic Wall now laid down infields and raised backstops. Local Texans came to watch, leaning on the fences as prisoners in peaked caps turned double plays. The Hearn Chronicle called it the damnedest thing in Robertson County. To the locals, it looked like a bizarre luxury for enemies. But they were missing the deeper game being played: democracy, inning by inning. The climax came when baseball stopped being just a pastime and became a battlefield of ideas. At Camp Hearn in November of 1943, the championship game pitted the Rhineland Raiders against the Bavarian Bears. Bottom of the ninth, a close play at home. The umpire, a former Wehrmacht lieutenant, called the runner safe. The catcher, an SS sergeant who had spent months lecturing others about honor and racial purity, exploded in rage. He demanded respect for his rank, shouted that the umpire was a traitor, and tried to overturn the call. But this was baseball, not the Third Reich. Players from both teams swarmed around him, not to support him, but to defend the umpire. They shouted American phrases they had learned from guards. The ump calls it as he sees it: shut up and play ball. For the first time, a sergeant's rank meant nothing when it clashed with the rules of the game. He stormed off the field and never played again. The lesson spread across every camp. On the diamond, democracy ruled. Other camps took the lesson even further. At Camp Rustin in Louisiana, the prisoner population included Poles, Czechs, Austrians, and Ukrainians. Men once forced to serve under German command often treated as subhuman. Under Nazi law, they couldn't eat beside Germans, much less play sports with them. But in Rustin, baseball shattered those barriers. The Rustin Internationals took the field. 2 Germans, 2 Poles, a Czech, an Austrian, 3 Ukrainians. Their pitcher, a Polish conscript. Their catcher, a decorated German sergeant. Watching them turn double plays together made Nazi racial theory look ridiculous. Even Americans joined in. On July 4, 1944, at Camp Trinidad, Colorado, guards and German prisoners formed a mixed team to face semi-pros from Denver. When a German hit a sacrifice fly to bring an American across home plate, enemies became teammates. The mixed squad won 8-6. Yet, for all its power, baseball also revealed contradictions that no prisoner could ignore. At Camp Ellis in Illinois, German players faced off against a team of Negro League stars from the Chicago American Giants. The Germans were stunned. These black athletes displayed skills far beyond anything they had seen. Speed on the base paths, power at the plate, flawless fielding. The final score was lopsided, 12-2, but the lesson cut deeper than the box score. One German Feldwebel wrote, "They cannot play with whites professionally. This puzzles us. Still, even their limited freedom is more than we ever gave Jews or Slavs." Baseball had cracked open another truth. America was not perfect, but its flaws were out in the open, debated in public. In Germany, such contradictions were buried, never spoken of. Another contradiction came in the form of comfort. While American prisoners in German camps starved on rations of thin soup, their brothers back home were reading letters describing Germans in US camps gaining weight and playing double headers between hot dogs. The shame was unbearable for some returning POWs. One former Camp McCain shortstop later learned that his own brother had guarded American prisoners in Germany, denying them food, while he himself had been eating pie after a 9-inning game. Even within the camps, Nazi hardliners tried to resist. In Camp Butner, North Carolina, Waffen-SS officers attempted to ban baseball altogether, calling it a Jewish-American corruption. But by 1945, it was too late. Veterans who had spent years on the diamond pushed back. They held a camp-wide vote and declared, "We took a vote, majority rules. That's democracy." Baseball had given them the words and the courage to fight ideology with something stronger. When the war finally ended in spring of 1945, the story of German prisoners in baseball did not stop with the closing of the camps. It followed them home. As repatriation began, the U.S. War Department saw an opportunity. They issued departing prisoners more than 50,000 baseballs, along with thousands of bats and gloves. Men who had arrived in America convinced they would be tortured now carried sports equipment back to a broken homeland. In bombed-out Munich, Kurt Holtzman used his Camp Cook glove to start the city's first baseball club. In Hamburg, Hans Urich opened a sporting goods shop specializing in baseball gear imported from America. Customers were his fellow former prisoners, eager to teach their children the strange game they had learned behind barbed wire. By 1950, Hamburg had 6 organized teams, every one of them founded by ex-prisoners of war. Letters crossed the Atlantic, prisoners writing to the guards who had once taught them curveballs and double plays. "When we take the field," one wrote in 1950, "we remember not the war, but the games." The legacy spread wider. By 1960, the German Baseball Federation counted 30,000 players. Youth clinics began not with batting practice, but with stories, how American enemies had once taught German prisoners a game that changed their lives. At NATO exercises, Germans and Americans still played together, carrying forward the tradition born in captivity. Perhaps the most powerful symbol was Otto Friedman, the last surviving member of the Camp Forest Tigers, who died in 2023 at the age of 99. On the wall of his Frankfurt apartment hung a single glove, worn and cracked with age. His final words about it were simple. "This glove matters more than any medal. It represents the day I stopped being a Nazi and started being human." The men who marched into captivity with swastikas on their sleeves returned to Germany with baseball gloves in their hands and with a new conviction in their hearts that prosperity comes